Make sure I'm good on the board. Hey, good morning, everybody.
Hi, Khalid.
Wow. I guess if you haven't heard by now, my name is Khalid. If you haven't heard by now, good morning. I'm so excited to get to talk to you guys this morning. This is probably my fourth time preaching, I think, ever since being a part of the ministry staff. And I'm super excited because this was a lesson I got to teach in the South last week, but it's not really a lesson. It's more just getting to just share about some stuff personal from my own life. And as you guys know, we've all been a part of, how many fall festivals have you guys had so far in the last couple of weeks? Like at least 50, right? But that was really our big thing last week. Like in the South region, we had a fall festival, and we had an amazing time with so much of like food. We had like pictures, we had games, we had like a turkey bowl. They were rolling a turkey outside of the church building. I'm like, I thought the turkey was gonna get up and fly. Like that's how fast it was rolling. But I was really thankful to get to share about it because harvest was a really interesting topic to talk about, especially because for me, like when you think of the harvest season, like one of the first things I usually think about is pumpkins. And if my clicker will go, I guess my clicker don't want to go. It's all right. That's what I got them for. So one of the first things I think about for the harvest season is pumpkins. And this is one of my close friend, Cambria. This is her baby. They were out at Southern Hills Farms, and they were picking pumpkins. And I asked someone else about it as well, and they were like, what do you think about when you think of the harvest season and the fall season? They're like, pumpkin spice lattes. And I'm just like, that's gross. I'm sorry. Don't like pumpkin spice. That's just personal preference. But something else I think about when I think of the harvest season is you always think about anyone who's like a farmer, anyone who's like reaping crops, who is, tilling the ground and reaping up some product. And I was hoping that today's lesson will be sponsored by John Deere, but that didn't work out. That's how sermons are going nowadays. We're getting sponsorships for sermons. But harvest actually personally means a lot to me from myself because I'm actually something of a second generation farmer myself. My dad actually grew up knowing about plants, but he actually went to school, if you go forward. My dad actually majored in agricultural science, and he has been in and out of agriculture for about 40 years. He served in the public school system in the Virgin Islands, and he also is working currently with the Department of Agriculture as a land surveyor for all three islands in the Caribbean, in the Virgin Islands. And if you look on the left, this is a picture of actually our front yard. This isn't like some off garden. This is actually my dad's front yard. So he grows so many crops in my yard. Like he has just peppers and onions and pineapples and all kinds of stuff growing. If you see on the right, you'll see him actually tilling the soil in our back property. Like he's very into it. And on the bottom is actually, my mom sent me this picture. This was, I think, about 2 years ago. He actually reaped this crop from our front yard. This is eggplants, tomatoes, and spinach. And that's all from my dad's front yard. If you want to save on some produce, start putting some stuff into the ground. But and even when I was thinking about preparing a sermon for harvest, I think the cool thing about harvest is that harvest actually means a lot to God. If you look throughout many passages in the Bible, there's a lot of passages that use specifically that word harvest. And even a couple of examples I'll show you is Galatians 6. It says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." And Matthew 9:37, it says, "Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." It's in there 3 times in one breath. That's crazy. If you move forward, if you go into 2 Corinthians 9:10, "He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness." And from the parable of the sower, this is one that a lot of us are familiar with. The seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 160 or 30 times what was sown. So there's a lot of evidence in the Bible. God is talking about harvest and how it is something that means a lot to him. And I believe that in turn, I believe it should mean a lot to us. And what I wanted to share about today is that I really feel from my own life and how I became a disciple and how I became a member of the Church of Christ, a lot of my life is a product of God reaping, of God planting seeds in my life and then them coming to harvest later. And I wanted to share a little bit again, like about where I come from, and where my story started, and not to give you like, to make you feel all this like about Khalid is this amazing person, but I want you guys to see how God is the hero in my story. So this is my family. As you saw on the left is my dad and my two sisters and my mom next to me over on the side. And I had an amazing childhood growing up where I'm from. I'm actually from the Caribbean, as most of y'all probably already know. If you can't tell by me talking with my accent, that's where I'm from. And I actually grew up here in the Caribbean. This is, if you look in terms of the big span of where the Caribbean is, that small little square is exactly where I grew up. And if I zoom in a little closer, look where Puerto Rico is, and that small little island called St. Croix. That's the island I grew up on. Just to give you context, from east region to the south region was about 26 miles is when I drive back and forth every Sunday. St. Croix is 13 miles long. St. Croix is half the length that I drive to go to the south region right now. So yeah, and I'll give you even something that was funny. Michelle Santos, when we were talking during the retreat, she was asking me, well, Khalid, how many people are, in the Virgin Islands, or in St. Croix? I said 100,000 people, and she said, wait, just in St. Croix? I'm like, no, that's the whole territory. Between all three islands, there's 100,000 people. So when you hear the stereotype of all island people know each other, yeah, everyone on the island knew each other. It's only 100,000 people between three different islands. So I mean, it was an interesting childhood growing up with so many people knowing me and so many people having that. And where my childhood started and where a lot of my story began was surprisingly in a very interesting place. I grew up as a Catholic. My parents, we were baptized as we were children. We did First Communion. We did confirmation. Like, we did the entire step process of becoming confirmed Catholics. When I was about 10 years old, in 6th grade, my parents put me in Catholic school, in St. Patrick's Catholic School. And this is really where the seeds of God sowing things in my life really began. We had just moved into a new school. I just lost my dad's mom. This was the first big challenge of loss I'd ever felt in my life. And at 10 years old, I don't know that I really completely understood what that was, but it was a big transition. I'd also just gotten taken out of baseball, which is any baseball fans in here? Anybody love baseball? There we go. We're going to a game after this. No, I'm just kidding. But I had all of this like extracurriculars that I was doing, and then I got pulled out right as I went into Catholic school. But the funny thing about Catholic school is that when I was in 6th grade at 10 years old, this is the exact place where I got introduced to music. So it's like, I'm thinking, Catholic school taught me so much about the traditions, about growing up as a Catholic. And I think, it's meant to like instill some seed of faith in you at that point. But honestly, at 10 years old, I was a boy. I wasn't really paying attention to like having like instilled faith at 10 years old. I wanted to run and bang my head on things and throw things. I wanted to be a boy at that point. But in 6th grade, little Khalid decided, of all the extra classes I could have taken, I decided I wanted to choose music. And, I could have done sports, I could have done art, I could have done special literature. But this is the class that I chose. And I actually wanted to try something with you guys real quick. I actually wanted to take you guys back 18 years, back to my first music class. I wanted to try something like you will see in most music classes, like a little exercise. You guys want to try it with me? Okay. All right, so you are my music students. So if Brian calls you for worship next week, don't be surprised. Just saying. So when it comes to music, everything is subdivided. Everything has beats. Everything has a place, okay? And the most common thing you'll hear is 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? Almost all music that you hear is subdivided into this. So let me hear you guys count to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's how music works. Now, how they taught us is we were doing this. We clapped. So clap with me and count. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. Now, we're going to try this. This half of the room is going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. This half, you're going to do 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. There's an and after every number. All right? So let's try this side of the room over here. Ready? 1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Here we go. And 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. two, and three, and one, and two, and three. And... Very good, music class. That was great. So, at 10 years old, that was my experience with music. That's how I got introduced to music. And I'll never forget my teacher, Miss Thompson. She was the most amazing person to introduce me to music at this time. After about 2 weeks of that, she talked to my parents and she was like, you know, this is how I envisioned the conversation going. She's like, Mr. and Mrs. James, you know, your son seems to have an aptitude for music. Which is funny because, again, that's all I had learned at that point. That's what she considered an aptitude for music, and I'm like, wow, okay. So she taught me the very basics, and we were going through that, and she was like, your son should learn to play an instrument. So she brought me into school, and she was like, yeah, go into the closet and pick an instrument. And so the instrument that I decided to pick was the instrument that at that time probably looked the most like me because I was very small and skinny, so I picked the trombone. I had a very big head, like the bell. I had a very skinny body, like the rest of the instruments. So I was like, perfect. It looks just like me. So I'm at 10 years old, and I'm just like, this instrument was like super difficult. I was really short. I had a difficult time playing it because of how long it was and how much air it took to be able to play it. I had pneumonia 3 times before I was like 8 years old. So it was difficult learning to play a brass instrument, but I loved it. All the difficulties that I thought would like just hinder me, I didn't care about any of them. I wanted to continue, and my parents were just like, the noise in our house was probably a joyful noise to them at that point. And then about a month later, after we were doing the music program for about a month, my Catholic school, again, this is all in 6th grade within the span of like 2 months of the school year starting. So like this isn't like years of like things happening. Within a month of me doing the music class, they started a steel band program in my Catholic school, which was a very interesting thing to play pan with Catholic school. But that was where I started. And so little Khalid, the pan is about this high, Khalid's about this short. And they had to get a milk crate for me every single time. So every time I had to play, there was a little milk crate. I had to stand up on it just to be able to play. So I was small. So again, I had all of these little things that were these physical limitations that should have debilitated me. I think in any aspect, we have things that can limit us from doing things that we like, but none of these limitations really kept me from desiring to play music, and I kept on going into it. And just from having that experience and being able to play at that young age, it really instilled a passion in me from a very young age. I'm about to turn 29 next week, and so music will have been in my life for about 19 years. But that was where it all started. And for me, when I went through all of high school, I did it all the way through graduating through high school, and I went to college. I was actually going to go to college, and I was actually going to go major in architecture. Yeah, I saw all of the puzzled faces. You're just like, what? But when I was in high school, I actually had an architecture program that I studied right before I graduated high school. I could have literally went into the work field and studied architecture straight out of high school, if I so desired. But I wanted to go to college, and I wanted to study architecture. I wanted to have, the college education with it and be able to go that route with it. I was originally going to be going to Valencia College, to UCF, and then to UF. I probably wouldn't have even been staying in Orlando for more than 4 years, honestly. And then a month into the program, I was miserable. I think that was like one of like the lowest points in my life, I think at that point. I mean, I'm 17. I think everything is horrible at that point. You just think like you leave your parents' home and all of a sudden you have no money. You think that life is over. That was how I felt at that point. But I really was miserable in architecture, but it's because I stopped playing music at that point. I had stopped music for about 6 months, didn't have any more of it in my life whatsoever, and I really just had a challenge with being not engaged in music. So I call my parents and I'm crying. I'm like, Mommy, goodness gracious. I called my parents and I was really trying to figure out, I'm like, what am I doing with my life? I really think I like music. And my parents were like, okay. So I bought my first trombone. This is January of 2012. I couldn't enroll in the program until the following school year, but this is where the story starts to take an interesting turn. In August of 2012, I entered into the music program. My very first day Wasn't even in my first music class whatsoever. We were like first class of the day. I meet a brother from the church in Orlando. My very first day of music class, I meet a disciple from the church in Orlando, and he and I become fast friends. You would assume we've been friends for like 10 years. We've known each other for all of like 5 minutes. But we were super close friends like right away, and he became one of my closest friends going through that entire first year of school. The following year, they started Bible talks on our school, on our campus at Valencia. So I don't know if you're starting to see a pattern of where things are like transitioning, but that following year, I got engaged in Bible talks. I got engaged in coming to church. I got engaged in relationships in the church. And then on November 13th of 2013, about 3 months after I started engaging in those relationships in 2013, I got baptized into Christ on November 13th. If the date looks familiar, it's because last week was exactly 9 years ago that I got baptized into Christ. And, whew, getting thirsty up here. And the amazing thing about that is that that's not where my journey ended with music. I mean, even just continuing on from being baptized, like I got the opportunity to continue playing music in the church here in Orlando and in so many different engagements in Orlando. On the left, I got the chance to play trombone at the FDC here in Orlando back in 2015. And then this was our Soul Jam festival that we had last year where I got to play pan. So the church gave me so many opportunities to play music, even when I grew into learning how to play piano, learning how to play bass, learning how to play drums. So music continued to be this thing that at almost every single turn of my life just continued to just change the way that my life was going. And again, I said it in the beginning, I'm not telling you guys all of this because I want you guys to see how my story, and just specifically only about how good I am at it, is that God is the narrator and he is the director of my story. When you think about, again, I'm going back to my life from back when I was a kid, I never would have imagined that at that time that music would have changed the trajectory of my life so many times. And I tell you this again is because I want to share with you from the scripture that I want to talk about in Acts 17. Now we're going to skip that one. We can move forward one more. I want to share with you guys about this because this is a particular story that I shared about with the disciples last week. And this is part of where God really made my story his own. It always was his. It never was mine. And in this part in Acts, Paul is talking to the disciples in Athens, and he's in this place called the Areopagus. This is basically like their social media center, basically, of Athens at that time. This is where they went to find out what's new, what's current, who had a baby, who getting married, who's engaged, all of that stuff. This is the place that you went to be able to get to and find out all of this news. And Paul is preaching to these people. So starting in Acts 17, it says, Paul then stood up at the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are religious." And in verse 23, go back one, there we go. "For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you." The part that I want to highlight is this, the one that says, "So the very thing that you worship." This, I really feel, was me. Growing up for most of my life, where I was in Catholic school, this was really me. I knew who God was. My parents had taught me God when I was very young, so I had all the experiences of growing up knowing that God exists. I knew that he was around. He was it's like a buddy. It's kind of like someone I could just walk around with. I knew he was always there. But I never fully understood who God was and why I was saying I was worshiping God. Why was I saying, yes, Lord, in church, and I had no clue who I was worshiping. I had absolutely no clue why I was saying all of these things and why I was saying that I want to worship this God. And this is really me. For most of my life, he's been present, but I've never really understood what it meant to worship him because I never understood him. At the time, even growing up when I was a kid, I didn't even understand that I could have a relationship with God. I was taught to just be obedient, follow what my parents told me, but I never understood that I could actually have a relationship with the very person I was worshiping. That didn't seem like a reality to me. And as you continue reading, I want you guys to continue with me in this. So in verse 24 and 25, it says, the God who made the world, it's just Paul. Now he's proclaiming, he's calling the people out in Athens. He's like saying, y'all are ignorant of who you worship, but I'm going to tell you the God who you should worship. The one who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples built by human hands. He is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. And in verse 26, trying to get that forward. The tech demons are working hard today. From one man he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. This is the part that I want to harp on for a second, because this particular part, I want to highlight this part, as you guys already see in yellow. We'll move forward one more. It says, he marked out their time in history, and I reworded it with saying he marked out their times in his story. I'm thinking back to 19 years ago where music came into my life at a very strange part where, music was just, this is something that I love to do for fun. It was something my parents were like, yeah, that's something good he can engage in. And yet, twice in my life, music changed the trajectory of where my life was heading. And back in 2004, this is when I was 10, it's like I could never have guessed that this is where I would be. I never would have guessed that I would be standing right here, November 20th, 2022, because I never understood that that seed that God planted in my life was meant to blossom when I got here. I never understood that that was going to change me going from architecture, going into music, to then becoming a disciple, to then becoming part of the ministry, to then doing ministry here in Orlando. But God knew the time that it was going to be a harvest for me. This is what I was talking about with the harvest season, is that the seeds that God sowed in me back in 2004, he knew that they would be coming to fruit right here, right now, in this season of my life. But I didn't know. I really was wanting to go on my own time. I wanted to follow my own path. I wanted to follow what I wanted. I didn't want to consider what God was really doing in my life, but he already knew the times that the harvest would come into my own life. And this is where I want to continue saying that God is the hero of my story. The harvest that came as a result is not of my own doing. All I was doing is just being a part. I was just the soil. All I am is the soil. I am nothing compared to the seed that God put in my life. And I had to ask myself, I'm like, why? I'm like, why did God put this seed back in my life at this age? Why did he do it? And I think and Paul continues and he answers this. He says, God did this so that they, and I even put it here, we would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him. Though he is not far from any one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. I think 19 years ago, the seed that God put in my life for music was something that he knew would help me to find him. I never would have guessed that that would have been what he used it for. I loved playing. I thought it was just going to be something I did just to, to hype up the crowds, and I was dancing and I was having fun. I love performing. I love entertaining. But there was a bigger purpose for why music was put into my life. It brought me to Christ. And again, this is the part that I want to talk to, is whether you've been a part of this church for 50 years, if you've been a part of a church like the Santoses or any of the elders in our church, or if you're visiting here for the first time, there is something that God can sow in your life from the most basic thing. And he can use that to reap a harvest 160 or 30 times what he originally sowed in your life originally. And this is what I want to encourage us. And why did he do this? So that we would have he literally said, perhaps. God did this so that there was a possibility that we would seek him. He didn't do this because he wanted to force us into having a relationship with him. He did this so that perhaps we'll seek and find him, so that we would have a chance to have a relationship with him. This is what I love, is that I love that this is what God used in my life, because I'll give you guys something someone told me that stuck with me, is that music is not essential to human survival. Think about it. You think about the entire evolution of humanity has done nothing specifically to actually ensure human survival. It has done nothing for the existence of humanity to ensure our survival. We can come to church, listen to a sermon, and go home. We could. We can wake up every single day, do what we need to do for work, and just go back and go to sleep. But most of us, when we're on the road, we're listening to music in the car. When we're at work, sometimes music is just playing in the background. But it is not essential for our survival. It is not essential for me being on stage talking right now. But music to me is proof that God exists. This one thing that has no say in how humans have survived since we've been created is so much proof to me that God exists. He gave this to me as something that would turn my life in a completely different direction and use it to glorify His name. And this is why I love being able to share about this, is because it is not my story. Music affects me so deeply. As y'all probably saw, I'm in the back, I'm breaking out in sweat even from talking, but in the back, I'm like dripping sweat down there. But music stirs so much of my emotions. It helps me to have a very deep connection to God when I'm in worship music, when I'm playing. But again, He did this so that I would seek Him and find Him. This is the seed that God used to be able to glorify His name, not mine. So I never would have imagined this little boy, this was me at 9 years old. No, I'm sorry, this is me at 6 years old, but very close. But this little boy could never have guessed that this one seed that God sowed in my life at that age would result in me having the amazing experiences of growing up in this Church of Christ and having all the amazing experiences, being able to become the worship director for Orlando, getting to serve and lead at our Florida teen camps. I even got the chance to play at the World Discipleship Summit. And I led the singles track for worship for the World Discipleship Summit. And that was all Brian's fault. Nah, I'm just kidding. But I continue to harp on this idea of harvest, is that there is something that God has sown in your life that He can use to reap harvest in your own life. And again, I want you guys, as I call the worship team up to come up as we close, I want us to really remember any of the little seeds that God can sow. It can be anything as simple as music. It can be something as simple as just being able to have an encouraging heart. It can be something as simple as just knowing like you love to give hugs. These are all small little things that can transform people's lives. My life has been changed because of the 20 years of God just working and tilling and watering the soil in my life so that it would produce a fruit where I'm able to share with you guys today. I love that I get to do this. I love that this is my full-time job. I serve in the teen ministry. I get to have relationships with your kids, with your high schoolers, but I also get to play music to encourage you and to be able to praise God's name. So as we close today, I really want you guys to really reflect. Look at the seeds that are sown in your life. And if you don't know what the seeds are, if your seed is in need of watering, I do implore you, talk to one of us. We want to pour Spirit water onto your life, but I want you to remember, we as the Church of Christ are not who makes the harvest grow. God is who makes the harvest grow. God will make things grow in His own time, but we have to help watering as the fellowship in Christ. So really, as we close today, I really want you guys to be encouraged. Look for the seeds in your life and pour water on them and watch God grow them in His own time. Thank you, guys.